This is a Rattle and Hum Sports podcast for Wednesday, May the 29th, the year 2013. I'm Bryan Houston, and we're talking Dallas Cowboys today with the contributor to Rattle and Hum Sports and the Dallas Cowboys beat writer, Matthew Postins. How you doing, Matthew?
Hey, fine, Bryan. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks for coming on with us. We're talking today, as always, about Jerry Jones. Over the weekend, I saw some of your musings on Rattle and Hum Sports, and Jerry Jones telling the NFL Network that 8-8 is not acceptable, and at the same time saying that Jason Garrett is not coaching for his job in 2013. Jason Garrett has come out and said everybody's playing for their job or coaching for their job every day, and he knows that's part of the deal. What do you think? Is Jason Garrett on the hot seat this year?
Well, as usual, Jerry's being his contradictory self, but yeah, I do believe Jason Garrett is on the hot seat. When you consider this is his third full year as head coach, he's been with the team for 7 years. You have to imagine he has his full program installed by now, and that he theoretically should have his entire team on the right page. Jerry Jones, we all know what the standard is. Jerry Jones wants to make the playoffs. He wants to get to the Super Bowl. He wants to win Super Bowls. He would love to do that with Jason Garrett. In fact, I think he's pretty desperate for it to work with Jason Garrett. I think that statement is just coming out of the fact that Jason Garrett has one more year left in his contract after this season. But to me, if this team has another 500 season or goes below 500, I don't think Jerry Jones has a choice. He's going to have to make a change if he's going to be able to take advantage of the talent of guys like Tony Romo and DeMarcus Ware, guys who are, admittedly in their 30s, starting to hit to that period where you have to wonder, when they're going to start going downhill. And Jerry wants to take advantage of that talent. So don't be surprised if they're under 500 if Jason Garrett's not the head coach next year.
Okay, and speaking of the coaching, I read some reviews. Apparently, Anthony Spencer is one of several players who is finding out that he loves playing for Rod Marinelli.
I can't imagine anybody that wouldn't like playing for Rod Marinelli. He really is a player's kind of coach. Even though he wasn't that successful in Detroit as a head coach, all the players there really enjoyed playing for him. The players that he coached when he was in Chicago as the defensive coordinator, same thing. The players that I dealt with when I was covering the Buccaneers when they were playing for Rod as a defensive line coach, same thing. Everybody I've talked to universally likes Rod Marinelli. And, he's one of those old school guys. He's a former military guy. He has kind of a drill sergeant mentality, but once you get to know him, you get really comfortable with him. And the players really put a lot of trust in him. So it's no surprise at all that they're, guys like Ware and Spencer and Jason Hatcher are learning very quickly that Rod Marinelli is a great guy to play for.
Now, staying with the defense here, I noticed that a lot of guys on the defense are getting bigger. We talked last time about Mo Claiborne adding 6 pounds of muscle. He's really cleaned up his diet. DeMarcus Ware and Anthony Spencer look like they're going to try to put on at least 10, maybe 15 pounds to play defensive end as opposed to outside linebacker. Talk about what the defense requires under Monty Kiffin, because you watched it at Tampa Bay and you saw it working firsthand. So what's the difference and why do they need to get bigger, and how much is that going to affect them as players? Because Ware and Spencer both were known for their athleticism, their agility. Is this going to slow them down?
Well, first off, Monty likes his players very physical. I know the cover two to some people sounds like a passive defense because they play a lot of zone on the backside, but he really likes everybody across his defense to be extremely physical, which means he wants them to be as strong as possible. Now, guys like Ware and Spencer gaining weight, that's important because a function of the 3-4 is to be leaner and quicker because you're playing off the football. Most of those outside linebacker types in those defenses are usually in the 250-255 range. When you get into the 4-3 and you're playing with your hand on the ground, naturally you want your defensive ends to be a little bit bigger. So no surprise that guys like Spencer and Ware are gaining 10 pounds of muscle so they can deal with being closer to offensive linemen, so they can use their ability to bull rush, their ability to create separation. Those techniques are a little bit different when you're in the 4-3 as opposed to the 3-4. The big thing for them is to find a happy medium. They want to gain weight, they want to gain strength, but they don't want to lose the quickness that has made them important to this defense over the past several years, especially when it comes to DeMarcus Ware. Simeon Rice played that position on the right side at about 265. So if Ware's in that 265, 267 wheelhouse, that should put him in position to put up similar numbers to Simeon Rice because, frankly, Rice and Ware very much the same player in the things that they do to get to the quarterback and the speed that they possess to take advantage of slower offensive linemen.
Okay, and then looking at as we are into the second week of the organized team activities right now, how has the team adjusted? Are they picking up this defense? How complicated is it to learn this defense compared to what they were dealing with last year?
Well, I like what Matt Johnson said earlier this week, the second-year safety who didn't get a chance to play last year in the 3-4 because he was injured basically the whole year. He said that the defense is not super complicated, and in truth, the cover 2 is not a very complicated defense. The principles are very simple. He said the issue is it's super hard to become excellent at it. And, right now, that's what everybody is focused on in camp. Learning the principles of the cover 2 and getting it to the point where it's just second nature, where you know where to go when you make your read. When you see what happens in front of you, especially when you're in the secondary, you've got to be able to read the keys properly so you're in the right place. So it's not a complicated defense scheme-wise, but it is very difficult to execute it effectively, because really what you want is you want those 4 guys up front to be able to rush the passer without any help from the blitz, and that leaves your linebackers and your safeties back in coverage so they can basically patrol the rest of the field. It takes a lot of repetition and a lot of ability to execute that properly.
Now, based on what you're hearing about the OTAs right now, and realizing that these guys are not working in pads, they're only in helmets and shorts, which players are making an impression right now? What guys are seemingly flourishing under the new tutelage?
Well, offensively, a guy I hear a lot about is Ronald Leary, the second-year guard who was an undrafted free agent last year. He's a player that the Cowboys are really hoping will kind of take that jump from being just a practice squad or a depth guy to being somebody who could potentially be in the mix for a starting job. Of course, the Cowboys had trouble with their interior offensive line last year. By no means are Nate Livings or Mackenzie Bernardo assured of jobs this year. So Leary could potentially be in the mix there offensively. They like what they see out of Terrence Williams, their third-round pick on the offensive side. They also like what they're seeing out of Travis Frederick. Defensively, Matt Johnson is a guy who really intrigues them. He was a fourth-round pick last year at safety. They feel like he has a lot of the traits you need in the cover 2 because he can cover the pass and he can cover the run, but he really hasn't had an opportunity to prove himself because of the injuries last year. So he's a big guy they're watching right now. They're keeping an eye on their 6th-round pick, Devontae Holloman, obviously. Their undrafted free agent, Brandon McGee, is a guy they like because he really fits the weak side linebacker position well. He could be good depth behind Bruce Carter. And Anthony Hargrove, obviously, comes in, and we talked a little bit about him last week. He comes in with a lot of experience in the 4-3, comes in with some cover 2 experience, and he could really help bring along guys like Tyrone Crawford, the second-year defensive end, and Kyle Wilbur, the outside linebacker who's making the transition to defensive end. He could really provide them with some mentorship to help them accelerate the process in becoming better at the 4-3, better at the cover 2, and being a heavier contributor depth-wise this year as opposed to last year.
Have they discovered any kind of diamond in the rough playing on the defensive tackle position?
Not yet. It doesn't sound like it. They didn't bring in very many guys. They didn't draft anybody at that position. They only brought in 1 or 2 guys from an undrafted free agent standpoint. None of those guys have stood out. The one guy that's really interesting to me is Kyle Wilbur, a guy that I think a lot of people thought was going to be at the outside linebacker position because of his weight and his size. But the Cowboys are actually going to move into defensive end, and he's only in the 250 to 255 pound range. And we talked a little bit about how size is important when you're playing defensive end. This is a guy who played defensive end at Wake Forest in a 4-3 at an underweight for the NFL level, but then transitioned to the outside linebacker in the 3-4 when they moved to that at Wake Forest. So he has experience with his hand on the ground. The question is whether or not he'll be able to gain enough weight to have the strength to fight off offensive tackles at the line of scrimmage, thereby making him a viable depth guy behind DeMarcus Ware and Anthony Spencer.
Another area that I find intriguing because the Cowboys were really hurting when Sean Lee went down at linebacker last year, and yet this year they've got him on the punt coverage team. What do you think about the wisdom of that move?
Well, it's early. It's really too early to decide or to make assumptions about whether or not he's going to be on special teams or not. At this time of year, a lot of guys are working at a lot of different places. One, because there are guys obviously fighting for opportunities to be on the roster, and special teams is a way to do that. But, with your veteran guys, you have them working on special teams a little bit because, there may be situations in which they have to be on special teams as a backup. Let's just say for argument's sake, they want to use Sean Lee as the up guy on punt teams, the guy who stands behind the center and blocks. Well, they don't want to use him for that position, but he needs to be trained in that position in case the guy in front of him is injured. So sometimes it's a matter of these guys just getting reps at the position so they're ready to assume the position if they need to. If I'm Jason Garrett and I'm the staff, I'm all for putting the best guys in the field when it comes to special teams. But given Sean Lee's importance to this defense, and given the fact that they consider him their long-term solution at middle linebacker, I personally wouldn't put him on special teams at all.
And Bruce Carter's also playing on the punt coverage team right now in the OTAs.
Yeah, and it could be the very same thing. He could just be cross-training right now, so he's prepared to do several different things if the need arises. But typically, your veteran starters aren't on special teams unless there's a really good reason, like you're a Deion Sanders and you have game-changing ability as a returner. People like that, generally speaking, are doubling up on special teams. Guys like Carter and Lee, I really can't imagine them being on special teams very often. They could surprise me. Because you do want your best guys out on the field. But given the fact that both of them missed significant time last year, it'd be very risky for the Cowboys to use them on special teams on a regular basis.
All right, talking about competition, you've written a lot of articles already about the competition at various positions. What kind of things are you seeing? Where is the great battle right now for playing time coming from? What positions are going to have the most competition?
Well, if you're looking at starting positions, offensive line is the position you want to watch because, Tyron Smith, to me, is the only guy who is assured of a starting role on that offensive line. Everybody else is competing for a job. That's why you hear chatter about guys like Ronald Leary, who really didn't play at all last year. The Cowboys are hoping he'll take a leap and maybe push Nate Livings or Mackenzie Bernardo. There's the question of whether or not Travis Frederick will play center or guard. If Frederick ends up at center, then what do you do with Phil Costa? Do you let him back up Frederick, or do you let Costa try to play for one of the guard positions? Ryan Cook has position flexibility. Kevin Kowalski has position flexibility inside. And then, of course, you have Doug Free and Jeremy Parnell fighting for the right tackle position. So if you're looking at starting competition, that is numero uno, number one. That's the one you want to watch throughout training camp because there could be significant changes up front from a starting standpoint. If you're looking at depth and you're looking at backups, defensive line is probably the big position you're watching because, their starting lineup is basically set. You've got Ware and Spencer on the ends. You've got Hatcher and Ratliff inside. The guys behind them, the only guy who's really assured, I think, of a roster spot in terms of depth is Sean Lissamore, and that's because he's done it for the last couple of years. He's got a multi-year contract, and he's proven that he can back up either one of those guys. Everybody else, they're fighting for playing time. And in fact, most of them are transitioning from one position to another. So there are questions about whether or not they could actually be a viable defensive end or a viable defensive tackle in the 4-3. So that's a position where there's going to be a lot of competition. And I think a position where the Cowboys are going to keep their eye on the waiver wire throughout OTAs, throughout minicamp, and throughout training camp if they feel like the guys that they have on their roster aren't getting it done.
Now, you mentioned the offensive line, and one of the criticisms of Jerry Jones and Jason Garrett and whoever is their reluctance to play young guys on the offensive line. Obviously, Smith being the exception to that rule, but there's some feeling that Leary and Arkin ought to be on that offensive line. They ought to be just throwing those guys in because they're younger, more talented than people like Nate Livings and Bernardo. What's your feeling about that?
Well, I didn't have a real issue with what they did offensive line-wise last year. Obviously, Livings and Bernardo did not live up to what they were hoping that they would produce from a play standpoint last year. The thing about it is, Ronald Leary was an undrafted free agent. As high as the Cowboys are on him, there's a reason why he wasn't drafted. There was something that he needed to work on, whether it was just his overall game or a particular facet of what he did as an offensive lineman. There's a reason why he wasn't drafted. Undrafted free agents rarely step on the field and produce from day one. It almost never happens. I mean, you think about Tony Romo. When you think about Tony Romo, he was an undrafted free agent, and he didn't play for 3 years. Miles Austin was the same way. He didn't play for a couple of years as an undrafted free agent. When you're not drafted, there's a reason why you're not drafted, and it's usually because you need time to develop. So guys like Leary and Arkin, they needed time to be in an NFL camp, to be with an NFL coaching staff, and to become players that at least this year, the Cowboys now consider them at least viable options to at least get playing time. So, signing Bernardo, Livings, it was a gamble really for the Cowboys to bridge a gap between now and 2-3 years from now when they hope those players will be ready to go and ready to contribute. It's just that the guys they signed last year just didn't get it done. And that's why you're going to see more competition at those positions this year, because they had a subpar 2012, and now you have guys in Leary and Arkin who have been in the NFL a year, understand how it works, and now have a better chance of being contributors this season.
All right, as far as injuries are concerned, the big injury, of course, is to DeMarco Murray, tweaked a hamstring, is back at practice on this Wednesday. But the bottom line is, what are the chances of Murray, who has been injury-plagued in the first couple of seasons, what are the chances of him playing in all 16 games this season?
I think right now it's 50-50. I mean, you don't get too concerned about a minor hamstring injury during the off-season. But, as you mentioned, this is a guy who has missed significant time each of the last 2 years due to injury. And you've got to keep an eye on him, and you've got to be careful with him. And if the hamstring persists into training camp, into the preseason, that's going to significantly increase the opportunities for guys like Joseph Randle, Lance Dunbar, Kendall Lawrence, even Philip Tanner to get playing time. Right now, I fully expect Joseph Randle to have a significant role in the offense. I think he's going to get 10 to 15 touches a game. And I think part of that is going to be because the Cowboys really want to, rest Murray. They want to, take some of the edge off of him a little bit. They don't want him to have to carry the football 25 to 30 times a game, because he's proven that at least right now, at this stage in his NFL career, he can't do it.
All right, one other note, the NFL moving the draft back 2 weeks starting next spring because of a reported scheduling conflict at Radio City Music Hall in New York. How much is that going to complicate things like these OTAs and trying to get these guys as much work as possible before they go to training camp?
Well, typically most teams have their rookie camps the week after the draft. The Cowboys actually had theirs 2 weeks after the draft, but typically it's that 2-week window. So if you think about it, that pushes back your rookie camps into late May. It pushes your OTAs back into early June, and probably pushes your mini camp into late June. In effect, it really does compress the league calendar, because there's a certain date by which all mini camps have to be complete, because they want the players to have about a month off between mini camp and training camp. So you've significantly compressed the schedule. I think what you'll see a lot of teams do now is they may combine their rookie camp and the first week of their mini camp, and combine those so they can save a little time. Takes a little rep time away from the rookies, in all honesty, because the rookie camp gives them 3 days of reps unto themselves without the veterans. But you may see some teams do that just as a way to make sure they can get their mini camp practices in before the deadline for mini camps to end. Another thing you could see teams actually have a week of mini camp before the draft with just their veterans, so they can get some work in, have the draft, bring the rookies in, then have the rookies come in for the rest of the mini camp and the OTAs with the veterans. So it's going to be very interesting to see how teams play it next year.
Very good. What's coming up for you for Rattle and Hump Sports?
Well, we're wrapping up the position competition stories. We've got defensive back and special teams coming up, and then just whatever comes out of Jerry Jones's mouth this week, we'll be writing about it.
And there'll be something.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
He can't help himself.
He can't. Matthew, thanks very much for coming on with us. We appreciate it, and we'll be talking to you next time.
All right, thanks, sir.
All right, Matthew Postins with Rattle and Hump Sports, covering the Dallas Cowboys. I'm Bryan Houston. This is a Rattle and Hump Sports podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.